So why I'm beginning, why I'm kicking off the seminar is because I present something we've been working together on with Katie and with Zoshi actually last summer, and it addresses this conceptualization or cosmological vision of ecology in China more broadly. So then Zoshi will come with her perspective from sacred forests in Liangshan, and the seminar will be concluded by Katie, who will talk about mountain spirits in Ninglang of Yunnan province, where Nosu also live. Okay, so in the beginning, I have to talk just a little bit and real quick about the concept of science in China as general, because this title of my talk is Cosmological Visions of Ecology, Gardenification of Ecosystem and Scientific Rewilding in Southwest China. So for those who don't know, real quick, the Western or European science was brought into China in the late Qing dynasty, when the empire, Chinese empire, which was turning into Western style nation state republic, started to indigenize various concepts coming from West, usually through Japan. When the empire actually ceased to exist, and Republic of China came to the stage, there was a huge thirst for something I call rationalism, the absolute rule of reason, in close connection to philosophical underpinning of modernity. In simple words, modernization of thought in China and also of every possible other realm. When ROC in 1949 lost the civil war with People's Republic of China, or with Communist Party of China, through the late 1950s to late 1970s, China went through a lot of excesses, let's say political excesses, but science was a huge part of this excess, because it became something like a religious dogma which is not to be questioned, which of course led to some catastrophes as the Great Leap Forward in late 1950s and early 1960s, and also the Cultural Revolution. Then in post 1980, with the reform and opening up, the unprecedented economical success came to China. But of course, after all these years, there was a general need for mitigation of environmental problems related to political necessity to uphold the social stability. In other words, for people not to really be dissatisfied with the government due to the very polluted environment. It suffices to say that it was very similar in this country, in the Czech Republic, where the ecological issues significantly contributed to the fall of that time regime. Well, here are some pictures which you can see, which I snapped during my last fieldwork visit in China. It was very interesting. I flew from EU, and in terms of these messages through these publicly displayed slogans, I almost saw no difference, because the previously very Communist Party politics, oriented slogans were rebranded into these green policies, which we actually call Green Deal here in EU, and which are called under the guise of ecological civilizations and Taiwanming in China. Well, it is interesting to look at the concept of ecology in China, how it was absorbed through the Japan in early 1910s, because until up 1950s, it was preoccupied with studying of not really living but lifeless world, meaning if you have a plant you want to study, for example, you don't really look how it grows and so in its environment, natural habitat, but you basically harvest it and then do the structural analysis of the whole body of the plant. In 1950s onwards, the whole, let's say, focus changed a little bit, but because of the ideology and need of China at that time, the ecology was all in the service of the state, especially to sort of ensure that there is enough food. It was really about productivity and how to yield, how to use the nature, so to say, for feeding the people, how to get the most yields of certain grains and so on. But in 1980s, the gradual focus on ecology predominated. The 1980s also saw something like a roots or grassroots of nowadays the term ecological civilization, which came as inspiration from the USSR actually through their concept of ekologiczeskaya kultura, and it started to be widely promoted. Well, from then on, let's say philosophers and other scientists together started to tap into resources which they can use for rationalization of the ecological turn in China, for the so-called cosmological, ethical, spiritual, and political dimension of this concept of ecological civilization. So most of these thought come actually from the major religions.
You want to come with?
Oh, yeah,
well,
yeah.
I'm going in a couple of minutes.
yeah,
I'm
sure.
just going to go to the toilet.
Sorry, excuse me. Please mute yourself. Mute your microphone. Yeah, thank you. So most of these thoughts come from this very well-known concept like 天人合一, or cultivation of virtue of Confucian thought, meaning that the people are inseparable from the nature or from the heavens, so to say, and so they should live in harmony with it. And there were also, beyond Confucianism, there was Taoism, Buddhism, and so on. And to much lesser extent, actually, the animist concepts of not only actually of national minorities or ethnic minorities in China, but also the Han Chinese animistic concepts like feng shui was sort of in the beginning understudied, let's say, in this matter. Most of these works until today actually stress the most broadly seen rationalization is that ontologically the Chinese civilization or Chinese thought lack this duality, this European duality between nature and human. However, this is in theory. In practice, from my perspective at least, I of course would like to see your opinions of this, but this non-duality between nature and humans were sort of buried by the high modernism and the push for modernity. But what I actually found interesting is that while this nature-human divide, like ideologically, even here, the nature was supposed to stand out of the nature and like use the nature for their purposes. The ontological lack of actually distinction between something which is natural or from itself and artificially built up environments is not that wide. This distinction is, for example, in Europe. So this is what I actually call Gardenification of the ecosystem in China, because as you can see actually on this image, which says 加强生态建设维护生态安全, meaning to strengthen the buildup of the environment and to the preservation of the safety of ecology or of the environment. And this this signpost is I took a picture of it in total wasteland natural reserve of Liangshan Mountains. So there is really something, that the distinction between natural and artifice is not really, in my opinion, that clear. So this led me in my thought. This led me in my thought further, and I came across the concept of Chinese garden, which again traditionally sort of reflected this Chinese, or majority Chinese Confucian sort of Taoist ontology. But while in Europe the garden tends to be seen as something enclosed, in China the gardens were not really enclosures. The authors argue, and the garden was not really clearly separated from something that's beyond. It was rather stressing the centrality of the garden in comparison with something that lies outside. But the enclosure was not so hard. So if we talk actually about cosmology, I always like this definition or this thought of Alfred North Whitehead, who was religious by himself, and he was also a great scientist. So the complete cosmology entails a construction of ideas of the world and cosmos in which aesthetics, moral and religious interests need to be put into relation with conceptualization of the world that originate in natural science. And here the natural science, in my view, could be any science. It could be humanist, it could be also philosophy, it could be humanities, and so on. And this idea of vision as something which is construed as a practical mind map using the material from the past and from the future, the imaginations, and to materialize it in the present, is also very much in line with the Chinese ontology, which really, again, the mainstream Chinese, majority Chinese ontology, which stresses the process and uncertainty and sort of simultaneity of linear and cyclical process in thought and also actually in action. So it actually in the end works as a spiral. So the goal of all this, of these built environments like gardens, is nowadays used, in my view, to revitalize the damaged ecosystem and kickstart their autonomous function again. I use this term rewilding, which was originally used in context of, putting back into the nature various kinds of plants or various kinds of already extinct animals. I use it also in a way which Jürgensen here quoted, tell us to think, and that it also can, it can be related, this rewilding, this idea of rewilding, putting wilding with the ecosystem as such. In China, though, I see the rewilding as, correction of relations which have been severed with the environment by humans. And this correction must be done by humans actually acting on the environment. So it's not that you leave the environment by itself to revitalize at some point, but you have to really take action. And then the environment lets, the people act in the right way. At least this is what I think is the thinking behind this gardenization of ecosystems. It's really a lot of relationality in it, which has almost these animist overtones. So real quick, I just want to present the 3 Gardenified projects which we visited with Zosi and Katie last summer. Here is the situation of those 3 projects are in Kunming. And they are actually, 2 of them lie on the shore of Tianchi Lake, which is which is in China something like epitome of pollution because it was really destroyed by the unsustainable agricultural practices. And the third site is Kunming Botanical Garden. So let's go first to the Laoyuhe Wetland Park, the lowest bullet point. So the Dian Lake actually plays a really important role in both history of the region from the perspective of the majority Han Chinese people, but also from the indigenous people like No Sui. I present here the No Sui because I do research about and with the No Sui, in which they call it the Eposono, and it's really tied to their mythology and their mythological hero, and it comes out in some of the rituals the Nosu people do when they call on the ancestors. Actually, this is very interesting. This is a very interesting case because the degradation of the lake began already 700 years ago, when Bukharan Muslims from Central Asia came to southwest China. With their help, the Mongol Yuan dynasty founded the Yunnan province, and the Bukharan Muslims brought with themselves the technique of irrigation and agriculture, meaning that a lot of rivers were diverted already back then, or a lot of water was already diverted from the lake, which actually over the 700 years caused it to shrink to roughly half of its size. Of course, as the population grew with this acceleration. So one of the last drops, so to say, for the lake was between 1958 and 1970 with the Mao Zedong's policy Yiliang Weigang, taking food grains as the killing. Again, very rampant agricultural extreme modernist practices for which they claimed actually the wetlands, since there is very fertile soil around them. And this caused the eutrophication of the lake, which means pollution through nitrogen and phosphorus. And even from the satellite picture, you have 3 lakes on this picture, and you see that the Dianshi is much greener than the other, and then the other 2 lakes. It's actually the shallowest lake, and the green thing is algae, which grows uncontrollably in the lake, and it prevents the water to undergo photosynthesis. So since 2008, there was implemented a policy, 4退3还, so 4 for quitting and 3 returning. Quitting would be ponds and fields and people and their houses that would be expelled from the shores of the lake. And what's going to be returned was forests, lake, actually, and wetland, because the wetland is seen as an ecological barrier. So there was, over the years of the last 15 years, there was different practices of how to, clean up the lake. Many of them were just trade-offs, really, because if you plant some, let's say, non-indigenous species, it solves one problem, like, for example, water hyacinth, and brings another one. So this is just like to take you to go through the wetland, which, as you can see on the map, is really a multi-layered project because it's site for education, leisure, and also ecology restoration. On this stone, the stone says Hezhangling. I was really baffled by this name. I asked, what is Hezhang? Then I was told that the Hezhang is a person who takes responsibility for the lake. It's the governor of that part of the city. And if his river pollutes the lake, he has a really huge problem. The slogan talks about that the lake or the wetland is the kidney of Earth, and everybody has this responsibility to protect it. Here you can see a close-up, which you can see that there is still, although the situation improved somewhat of the lake in the last 20 years, even with input of projects from Switzerland and some international efforts to depollute the lake, it's still very polluted. But here, if I come back through, you can see actually the river on this diagram. The authorities build up again this wetland, artificial wetland, in an effort to actually purify further the water which goes from the rivers. And that's really something that's very interesting, but only time will tell how effective it actually really is. So let's go to second project on the shore of the Dien Lake, and that's Yunnan Ethnic Village. In the past, I really avoided these places because, of course, I wanted to travel and see the real thing and not really like artificially built ethnic villages in Yunnan, where there is on display all the nationalities. But I have to say at the same time that this place was really put together with the human zoo concept of the colonial US and Europe of the 19th century. This is a little bit of fake, like false analogy, because this is actually a theme park. This is actually a theme park where the various people are employed. They bought the houses, actually, those employees, many of them, and live there. It's part of their urbanized rurality, really. Also, these places is particularly important because there's a huge fluctuation of employees who who actually spend there some time and then they return back to their rural homelands. And they then, at those places, I met several of them on different parts of Yunnan, they then act as an expert on their cultures. So they basically get out from their rural everyday life, go here, learn what their culture is, so-called, and then they go back to teach what the culture is of the other people in their homeland. So when the scientists actually then go to those homelands, these people serve as interlocutors between the scientists and the local population. So very paradoxically, some of this thing is this manufactured landscape is connected to something that's called original ecology, and this is really about culture more than environment, Yuan Sheng Tai. But this Yuan Sheng Tai, when translated from places like this, even to rural areas, is also entirely built up from scratch. So it's not actually Yuan Sheng Tai, it's Zai Yuan Sheng Tai, probably like re-originated ecology, and it's something else in the end than the original culture. And this project, as these previous ones, is very multi-layered in terms of education, culture, identification building, nation building, and knowledge sharing. So here you can see some of the pictures. It's very similar to say what we have here in Europe. We call it Skansen, where the people, or the employees, basically perform the rural and idyllic, probably, life of their ancestors. And finally, the third place, real quick, is the Kunming Botanical Garden. Again, you can see that this plan really looks like some kind of spaceship. It's very interesting because founded in 1938, it specialized in ex situ conservation of Yunnanese plants, especially endangered plants, and especially those from Hengdang mountain range. It's very well connected to international, scientific circles, especially good relationship it has with Royal Botanic Garden in Edinburgh. And it sort of developed a lot of harvestable plants, like for Chinese medicine and also for heavy industries like rubber in Sichuanbana, which then again caused problems because then these rubber plantations need to be again rebuilt and made a natural park. So there is also a strong ethnobotanical component to this from the very beginning, because it's in Yunnan, ethnically diverse place, through the work of Pei Shengqi, especially since 1980s, famous ethnobotanist in China. again multi-layered project, again built-up project, as with the Yongsheng Tai. In ethnic villages, actually, then this build-up goes much further than into these natural reserves outside of the urban areas than we are used to here in Europe, where we when we want to conserve something, we basically close it off to people and maybe just allow people with some sort of permits to go to these kind of places. But this really is made into very human kind of participatory destinations where the people do all sorts of conservational activities. So this is just just a few snaps from the botanical garden. As you can see, a lot of plants are described in relation to the ethnic minorities of China. Some plants really are, the story of the plant is coated in the historical things of the Chinese Empire and so on. So just to conclude real quick, I wanted to say that the gardenification of this ecology is a feedback loop between humans and the nature. And rewilding, as I said already, is correction of their mutual relationship. This is really a theory. This is how it should be. But of course, the practice is much more convoluted and complicated. I wanted to talk a little bit about, real quick, compare the EU Green Deal and these Chinese efforts for the conservation of ecology, because there are significant differences. While in Europe, I think we more emphasize as I said, the conservation. In China, the participatory of human or political institutions is much more the border between the wilderness and the institutions is much more blurred. Of course, I mean, China is authoritarian country, so if it decides to build reservations or cut the carbon emissions, it could do it like very easily without much of a backlash of the population. But it's not only stubbornly authoritarian and nonsensical, in a way that what I think that China did good in promoting their way of greenification and so on is that they put it in more as a holistic concept. Therefore, they connected to the nation building, they connected to the history, they connected to the very cores of Chinese identity, or the identities, as the so-called Chinese nation consisted of 56 nationalities or ethnic groups. While in Europe, I think we really struggle with this because Aristotle never really wrote about the environment or natures, and then therefore we don't have like sort of like a means how to exploit this knowledge or this thinking of the biggest philosophers of our history. So this is definitely this is really definite. This is very big advantage. And of course, the geopolitical component is that all this greenification is closely connected to very politicized concept of this Renleming in Gongtongti community of shared future for mankind, which the current President Xi Jinping just pushes as one of the strongest component of foreign policy of China. What is downside of this? Downside of this is that the local knowledges, which should in an ideal case really merge with scientific outlooks, and they should go hand in hand or like through the feedback loops. In China, of course, because it's authoritarian country ruled by certain ideology, it's ultimately bureaucrats in offices who decides what is superstition and what is actually local knowledge. If this ritual is something to be preserved, or is it something malicious which can threaten well-being of the people. So this is not really, this is up on people in the offices and not actually the practitioners in the terrain. So the ideal case that the cosmological visions rooted in these philosophies, if communicated and shared properly, can mobilize people towards the actions that improve ecology and interconnect past with future in the present. So thank you for your attention. I took a bit longer than I than I was expecting. So I'll just pass the floor to Zoshi now, and she will present her